I love big movies. The bigger, the better. The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, Endgame. The more epic you can make it, the more absorbed I get. Trilogies, series, sagas, give me more. More world building, more epic battles, more fantastical sights, more mind-boggling adventures. If I were to describe my tastes, I'd probably say I love anything that would get a 10-year-old boy excited. Car chases and sword fights, robots, pirates and cowboys, magic, spaceships, and dragons. Give me the stuff that thrills. Give me the stuff that ignites my imagination. Give me blockbusters. The Summer Blockbuster officially gained its designation in 1975 with the release of Steven Spielberg's smash hit Jaws. The film performed far beyond expectations, becoming the most successful film of all time. That is, until a few years later with the release of a little film called Star Wars. From then on, a sharp divide was driven into the middle of a studio release schedule. Summer was now the domain of the blockbuster, the crowd pleaser, the huge, inventive, imaginative films that some critics complained were devoid of substance, but audiences rushed in with kids in tow, spending their summer vacations in the multiplex. For many, the summer became the one time of the year that quote-unquote good movies were released. And for most of my life, I was one such person. Throughout my childhood and adolescence, I couldn't wait for the summer and the movies that it would bring. Every year I'd visit the theater seeking my yearly fix for films set in the sci-fi, fantasy, and action genres. And as the air cooled and the boring films returned to theaters, I'd eagerly set my eyes on the following year's selection of blockbusters with incredible amounts of anticipation. But as the years have drawn on and I've grown older, I have found my enthusiasm for the summer movie season waning. More and more I look forward to the fall when studios release their most artistically driven films in hopes of Oscar gold. And I wonder to myself, what changed? Did my tastes just mature and develop? Well, that might be part of it, but I still love those movies I loved when I was younger. My favorite films still fall into that blockbuster category, with huge films like The Lord of the Rings, Braveheart, and Inception rounding up my top 3. I still get incredibly excited for the occasional Star Wars and Marvel film, but most blockbusters today have lost their luster. And I don't think that that's just me. Earlier this summer, Men in Black International was released, and it was just okay. Like, really aggressively okay. The pieces were all there, good cast, decent effects, a good director, but the film just felt bland. Not bad, just boring. The plain, unsalted cracker of this franchise. Compared to even the worst of the previous films, it just felt unimaginative and stale. And compared to the original, well, let's just say it gives a whole new appreciation for just how good the original was. How imaginative, well-written, well-acted, and funny it could be. This new film, on the other hand, just felt like a string of unimaginative set pieces strung together to make the skeleton of a movie. It occurred to me after watching this movie that this isn't an issue contained to just this one franchise. I feel like Men in Black International is just a symptom of a much larger trend of blockbusters becoming more rote and cliche. A trend that I like to call the homogenization of blockbusters. And I'm not saying that blockbusters have gotten worse per se. There have been plenty of terrible blockbusters over the years, and in fact, I'd say most blockbusters today are at least decent. What I'm saying is they're all starting to feel the same, homogenized. With every passing year, I feel those summer blockbusters become more safe, more paint by numbers. Like all the studios are following the exact same formula. Introduce bland main character, immediately toss them into the action, have 3 or 4 cool set pieces, big CGI-infused battle with a skybeam at the end, set up a sequel, the end. It's a formula that works fine, but it's a formula that doesn't really allow for any real storytelling or creativity. Let's put it this way. McDonald's is the biggest fast food restaurant in the world. How did they do that? Well, they create a product that appeals to everyone. If you want to appeal to the largest group of people possible, you have to create something that appeals to everyone's palate. Most people would agree that McDonald's hamburgers aren't great. Many would even say it's kinda gross, but nobody hates them. They're good enough. Fine. They're generalized enough that just about anyone, even people who don't really like McDonald's, will eat there if it's convenient. If you're trying to appeal to a niche market, you've got to stand out. Try new things. But if you're an established brand that wants to appeal to literally everyone, you find the middle ground that everyone finds tolerable and market it to everyone. Blockbusters these days are taking the McDonald's approach to storytelling. They've found a certain formula that works, They exploit it, people eat it up. If you look at the lowest of lows of movies in past years, like in the 2000s and the 90s and the 80s, you see movies that took some chances, went in interesting directions, even if those directions weren't very good. And consequently, the highs were higher. The MCU Marvel movies are all pretty great, and a few are amazing, but they all feel a little constrained by the MCU formula and the larger concerns of the MCU. But compare most movies in the MCU to other superhero movies without these constraints, such as Spider-Man 2, Logan, The Dark Knight, Deadpool, the very first Iron Man, or the Daredevil TV show. There's a drastic difference in terms of storytelling there. There's more room for character development, rich themes, unexpected story direction, and artistic details. These movies feel like they have room to breathe, like each has its own identity and style. A movie like The Joker could never exist in a franchise like the original DCEU or even in the best parts of the MCU. Honestly, I prefer a not-so-great Marvel movie like Spider-Man 3 or X-Men The Last Stand over some of the blander entries in the MCU, because they have more to say. They take bigger risks, even if those risks really don't pay off. Now, I talked a lot about the limitations of the MCU in a recent video, so I won't keep repeating myself, but it's a good example of the more paint-by-numbers serialized approach much of Hollywood has adopted in recent years. Now, you might be saying, but there have been some truly great superhero movies in recent years that do have their own identity and don't feel homogenized. And you'd be right, I absolutely love how both Marvel and DC seem to be moving away from this trend with great and unique films like Endgame, Thor Ragnarok, Shazam, and The Joker. But the problem doesn't just lie in superhero movies, it's most blockbusters these days. Take, for example, Pirates of the Caribbean. When Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End came out, I thought it wasn't very good. I couldn't believe how badly they ruined the franchise with terrible creative choices I definitely disagreed with. But then 4 and 5 were released. Two movies that are so bland and forgettable I literally forgot I saw both of them. Corporate cash grabs at their finest. Or their worst. And suddenly I was filled with new respect for At World's End, an incredibly weird and strange movies that almost feels like a piece of abstract filmmaking at times and honestly probably wouldn't get made today. When compared, you realize just how lifeless and unimaginative these sequels are compared to the depraved imaginings that Gore Verbinski brought to the franchise. In Pirates 2, Jack and company wind up stranded on an island surrounded by cannibals who decide to worship Jack as a god while the rest of the gang struggles to escape and free Jack from his newfound godhood without getting eaten. It's weird, but it's fun. Compare this to the 5th movie where they get stranded on an island and Jack is, oh no, forced to marry a fat, ugly lady. In a franchise stuffed to the gills with krakens, undead pirates, and fish people, is marrying an ugly lady really the most thrilling plot development you could have cooked up for this portion of the film? And that's not even diving into the amazing character dynamics, plot developments, and world building that these sequels abandon for, yeah, Jack's doing piratey things, yay! Give us money. It's not just cliche, it's a lack of compelling storytelling. At this point in my life, I find boring to be a much bigger crime than just flat out bad, so long as the bad is actually kinda interesting. But a movie doesn't even have to be truly bad to fit into this trend. There are plenty of movies I'd consider good that still have this homogenized feel to them. The aforementioned MCU for starters, and how about these new Star Wars movies? None of them are truly bad, shut up. All of them are definitely better quality than the Star Wars prequels, but these feel more like products than stories. Like, all of the writers and directors put their all into crafting the best Star Wars movies they can, but these movies still exist because a studio wanted more Star Wars movies, not because an artist had a story to tell. For all their faults, the prequels feel justified in their existence. George Lucas had more stories left to tell, more inspiration born out of a world he created. These movies don't feel organic. They are movies created to sell a product, not to organically continue a story. And this is what I'm talking about. The same can be seen in the Disney remakes, in the Transformers movies, in the Fast and the Furious movies, and every shared universe copycat of the MCU. Blockbusters are no longer about crowd-pleasing entertainment. They're no longer about telling a story. They've just become a vehicle through which studios can sell tickets, nothing more. But it doesn't have to be this way. Look at a movie like Pacific Rim and now compare it to its sequel. Without Guillermo del Toro at the helm infusing his passion into the project, the sequel is hollow and empty. But with a filmmaker like del Toro at the helm, even a dumb movie like the first Pacific Rim, which is just a movie about robots smashing into each other, can have some substance and style. Look at the Transformers movies, the very example of soulless cash grabs. And then watch what happens when a filmmaker like Travis Knight comes along and makes a movie like Bumblebee. He's a director who's actually passionate about the franchise that he's working on, and it really shows. Or look at what happens when the studio takes the gloves off a filmmaker like James Mangold and lets him make a masterpiece like Logan. Mangold made another Wolverine movie, The Wolverine, which wasn't all that great. You can feel the studio mandates just holding that movie back. But then, set him loose, and he creates an amazing movie with a fantastic story which got a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination accompanying a truly fantastic film. The film industry sits on this weird crossroads between art and business. You want to make good art, but you have to make money or you can't keep making art. But that doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice art in favor of financially safe decisions. You can make a movie that's a crowd pleaser, a blockbuster, but still tells a great story. Because whether you're making an art house flick or a blockbuster, story is what film is about. It's the foundation that film rests upon. And there's no reason you should sacrifice story to appeal to a wider audience. There used to be a much smaller gap between the people pleaser and the art house. Traditional blockbusters like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars, and Jaws were all nominated for Oscars. And more artistic fare like Gone with the Wind, The Godfather, or Braveheart were all huge hits. And in the realm of television, there is no difference, with genre shows like Game of Thrones sweeping up Emmys every year, along with ruling the airwaves in the pop culture conversation. Mindless action movies have their place, as do contemplative art house films meant for more niche audiences. But there is no reason that a blockbuster cannot have a satisfying character arc, or a colorful supporting cast, or beautiful cinematography, amazing dialogue, and unconventional story directions. Just because a movie is a blockbuster meant to appeal to tons of people does not mean a film has to be devoid of substance. More so than this, I just want to see blockbusters rise above their label. Most of this video is about me trying to convey this feeling of homogeneity in modern day blockbusters, but honestly, I want more than just a return to blockbusters that are less formulaic. I think blockbusters have the potential to not only be better than they are now, but to be the best kinds of movie, period. Even in the days of Jaws and Star Wars, there was this attitude towards blockbusters as not being quote-unquote real cinema. There's always been a sharp divide between the art house world and the world of the popcorn flick, as though crowd-pleasing films are fine if you want to consume something inconsequential, but if you want real substance, you have to return to the art house, the indies, and the Oscar bait. And this just isn't true. My tastes have always landed somewhere in the middle of the spectrum. I love spectacle, but I also love substance, and I honestly see no reason we cannot have both. Every rare blue moon, we see a movie that appeals to audiences and critics alike. Movies like The Lord of the Rings, The Dark Knight, Braveheart, Inception, Gladiator, Pixar's entire catalog, Titanic, Logan, Mad Max Fury Road, Blade Runner 2049, Get Out, and so many more. And what I want is more movies like these, both artistic and enjoyable, both epic and intimate. There's absolutely no reason a movie can't be both big and also heartfelt. There's no reason a movie can't be both an action-packed movie and an artistic movie. Stop putting artists in boxes, telling them that they have to make one kind of movie or another. Fantasy author Brandon Sanderson, author of my favorite book, The Way of Kings, once was on a panel and was asked why he writes fantasy. He responded, "I've read fantasy books with as much literary style as any literary novel out there. I've read fantasy books with as much romance as any romantic fiction out there, and as good mysteries as any mystery fiction. So fantasy can do all this, plus have dragons. So why not? In a blockbuster-sized movie, you can do anything you can do in a smaller movie. Drama, self-discovery, romance, mystery, weighty themes. You can do all of this, but with dragons, and maybe a car chase, and a few robots, and an epic battle thrown in there to sweeten the plot. A blockbuster merely presents a larger canvas for an artist to work on. So here's hoping that studios wise up and allow more artists to share their vision and tell their stories, but just with broader strokes.